to preserve a relationship and preserve the unconditional love, it will help to be mindful yet detached. Because if you immerse yourself in this other person's state, well, they're just trying to lash out at you to make themselves feel better so they can take the heat off themselves so they don't have to feel like they're beating themselves up all the time. I think it's just a response that comes natural to somebody that is angry to want to look outward and blame outward because they're so tired of suffocating in their own internal fire that, you know, you're an easy target. And you can prevent yourself from being an easy target. It takes practice, but that process that Ross explained about observing and not absorbing will definitely be a winning process. And, you know, applying that to people that you feel are emotionally abusive and manipulative, and especially when they don't know it or aren't ready to take responsibility for it. Angry and emotionally manipulative people, they're not bad people. I don't consider people good or bad. I mean, that's so black and white and unrealistic to begin to try to simplify something, you know, so extraordinarily profound. But these people are very hurt people, very hurt, and most likely not ready to take responsibility for themselves. And because they're not ready to take responsibility for themselves, a lot of the time they're going to try to force you to take responsibility for something they say, something they do, some way they feel. And no, that is not your responsibility at all. You are your responsibility. Your emotions are your responsibility. Your well-being is your responsibility. And preserving all that and loving yourself, maintaining that type of state is your responsibility. Now, when somebody else is trying to rock that world, let that be your trigger to detach into a meditative state of observation. Observe their emotional reactions, observe their reactive words. Just be mindful to observe those patterns, the tones, the volumes, the gestures, the body language, and make notes on, okay, this person's probably struggling with this, because, you know, just kind of making connections and parallels, imagining you're them and imagining they're saying those things to themselves. And how would that make you feel? That'd make you feel pretty worthless and pretty sad, pretty upset. Like you want to blame somebody else because you're tired of hurting and blaming yourself. And life's not going to get any better as long as anyone continues to blame and hurt themselves. So because we cannot make someone choose to better themselves or to seek their own wellness, their own well-being, or even to preserve their relationships, we can't force people to do these things. But we can preserve our own, we can maintain our own well-being, and we can do our best to preserve relationships, but never at the cost of your own sanity and never at the cost of your own well-being. Self-sacrificing is not a good path to go down. So when you're in the middle of an interaction with someone that you want to preserve the relationship, you practice maintaining the unconditional love and the empathy, but detachment, you know, observing, not absorbing their insults or their, you know, cruel words, behaviors, whatever form it's coming in. The state of detachment and the meditative detachment, that of noting the patterns, the volume, the body gestures, choice of words, the tone. There's a lot of things that are going on that can reveal some very intimate details about the person that's lashing out. Most angry people are self-loathing people, so it's difficult to constantly suffer that internal dialogue of self-loathing. So a lot of the time it seeps out, and you know, the whatever person is convenient, I think, for them to lash out at, or someone that points something out, you know, in an effort to help. A lot of the time it's almost like somebody is tossing fire at you when you're trying to throw them a life raft. It's a difficult one to definitely tolerate. But when you have unconditional love, obviously it's something that you know you're strong enough to manage. Don't be manipulated into taking responsibility for somebody else's actions. That's all them. And as much as you may want to help, as much as I may want to help, and all the unconditional love in the world, they have to decide that they don't want to be that way anymore. They don't want to live in a state of self-hate and self-loathing and anger and all the behaviors that triggers, the self-deprecating behaviors. And just, it can be difficult to watch that destruction. It can be difficult to watch someone destroy themselves around you. It's not easy at all. And it definitely challenges, your unconditional loving principles. But I know that I can unconditionally love myself, so I can unconditionally love anyone else that, ever comes my way. And, even when, it's people that are close to me that, I'm flabbergasted at, how they choose to interact with me sometimes. Especially like your primary relationships, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your spouse, somebody that means the world to you. And you just wonder, why am I not enough to convince that change? And as upset as that makes me still, I know it's not my place to make somebody change. I know it hurts my heart to see that unwillingness to love themselves, but it's not going to change my love for me. It's not going to make me love them any less, but it means that I have to do something in regards to my disposition, my actions, and my relation to them. And detachment is the surest way that I can maintain my well-being. They have to live with me at the end of the day. So keep that in mind when you're interacting with somebody that, you may feel you're dependent on, and worried that you don't want to rock the relationship because you might be put in a vulnerable position, or, abandoned, or, any one of your fears. Don't let your fears convince you to sacrifice yourself. You have to detach from those toxic emotions that are, just constantly being, shot towards you. You have to realize that they feel that way about themselves. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about them. A lot of the time I imagine when somebody's getting angry and trying to project themselves at me, I just realize that this is a really upset and traumatized individual, and I kind of perceive them in a childlike manner. They had so many wounds that they've never managed to address and heal, that they're just festering with infection, just emotional infection. And you know how that goes, the contagious infection of emotions. Happiness is contagious, as well as anger, sadness, anxiety, hatred. Look at the world today. Be the one that chooses not to react. Respond, but not react. And I would say respond, when the other person is in a more sober state from their anger, sober from maybe any drugs or alcohol, or sober from the emotions that they're presently experiencing and thrusting at you. It's probably not a good time when somebody is trying to wage an emotional war with you to try to voice your opinion or explain your hurts. A lot of the time it's just best to walk away. So when we're dealing with emotionally, toxic people, I don't want to create condemning labels, so please, anyone listening to this, it's not this ultimate judgment that you're always, this person will always be toxic. It's just a present state that they're struggling with. Do not indulge yourself in somebody else's self-loathing thoughts, especially when they want you to take responsibility for them. You are responsible for you as much as I'm responsible for me. Anyone else trying to tell you that you make me feel this way or you make me do that, nobody can make you do anything. He who angers you controls you. It's a nice quote to keep in mind. So, keeping that in mind, don't allow somebody to have your sacred sense of like self-awareness and the control of it. Don't let anyone else move in that territory. That is for you. That is that is where you put your roots. Ground yourself. Maintain that gorgeously grounded position, even in the face of just bitter hatred. During these times where you feel like somebody is waging a war on you because they are struggling with their own internal dialogue and their internal self-hatred, that is the best time to set an example to this person. Show them how to take care of themselves. Show them about self-care through caring for yourself. Don't tell them, just show them through your actions. If you think of the mind likes to protect itself, the ego likes to preserve itself, so because of that, the mind will often trigger the tongue to speak words that are so incongruent with the physical, reactions or gestures or tonalities and volume and so many aspects to what your physical body language is expressing versus your verbal body language. Your mind manipulates the verbal, I think more for the sake of self-preservation, especially when there's a very dominant sense of ego. And the body is more interested in just expressing itself, and you'll see a lot of genuine reaction within the body and a lot of incongruence in relation to the verbal versus the body language. People projecting their anger at you. They're definitely so self-loathing that they can hardly tolerate, being within their own mind, their own body, that it's much easier to insult you, to hate you, to just be bitter and ruthless towards you and demand you take responsibility for all their struggles and their feelings. And, when you're communicating with them a lot of the time, they hear things that are so far from what you said that you're restrained as to should I even say anything to this person? Is this, going to be misconstrued into, an argument? Is this going to be misconstrued into, I said something that I know I didn't say, but how am I going to convince somebody that's already convinced themselves I said that? So it's futile unless the person really decides that they want to change and grow out of, the self-hatred. It's a difficult one to decide. I mean, it took me a while, but I eventually saw that I had no relationships around me. My family wasn't in my life. I wasn't, committed to myself. I was just existing and drifting along, and it didn't feel good. And I just wasn't ready to quit life, so I am working on learning to continually deepen my love for myself, which allows me to have that same, profound sense of unconditional love for others, and to maintain it when I am tried the most. I remind myself that these people I want to keep in my life that may be struggling with their own internal demons, that I was once there, and I'm trying to imagine how I would have liked somebody to interact with me and love me. I think we just are so tired of the patterns we've developed within our own selves for, the sake of mental survivability of that identity. It's some sort of identity is attempting to be preserved by the mind, and the mind is triggering these reactive behaviors. So knowing that is very helpful to perceive how that angry person identifies themselves. That will, be crucial into understanding where they're coming from. Saying one thing and doing another, and they're very up and down and inconsistent because they're struggling within themselves, and then sometimes, when they're having their moments where it's more positive and they're, very upbeat, but then quickly can fall back into a reactive, angry state and want to blame, outwardly those around them for, them retreating back into their own anger. And, that's the mind attempting to preserve however it has chosen to identify itself. And as soon as you're conscious of that, you can be mindful enough to change it. I don't think that's truly the most difficult part. I think the most difficult part is getting to the point where you decide to recognize it even. It's uphill the moment you decide to and recognize what you struggle with. But until then, most likely the help that you offer somebody is not going to be met with thanks or gratitude. And I am thankful that you are helping whoever it is that you're trying to help, but we can't force our help on people. So remember that. It's not help if we're forcing it. So step back. Don't get into that contagious arena of emotions. Just love yourself, set an example so the other person can see how to love themselves and self-care options. And you don't have to verbally say these things. It's probably best you don't. I've had little success with verbal or written in regards to this. My actions have been my most sound form of expression in regards to the things like somebody chooses to attempt to provoke me in a way where they're expecting a reaction and expecting to receive their fuel for their own turmoil. My most sound response has just been with my self-care actions, my self-loving actions.